Hi everybody, it's Miss Peachy again from WCA Biology. So we are doing Unit 6, Lesson 2 today on photosynthesis. And ladies and gentlemen, this one is a bit of a doozy. Lots of content in this lesson. In my opinion, probably more kind of detail and content than you all should need to know in 10th grade biology. So I'm hoping to simplify this, make it somewhat easier to understand, and kind of weed out some of those technical details that I think are things that at this level you don't really need to know. So as you can see from the list of keywords on slide 1, we have a lot of different vocab terms that pop up here. I have been talking about ATP a little bit in some of my previous lessons, so ATP is mentioned here, as well as ADP, which is another molecule that's very, very similar to ATP. So ATP refers to adenosine triphosphate. It's a molecule that carries energy inside cells and is the energy currency of a cell. So as you can see, adenosine triphosphate has 3 phosphates, right? Whereas adenosine diphosphate has only 2 phosphates. And so the difference is you add that extra phosphate group to make adenosine triphosphate or to make ATP. And wherever you add a group like that, there's energy that's stored in those chemical bonds. So it's like stored chemical energy. And that's the energy that's used then to do a lot of cell functions later on. Then we have ATP synthase, which is a protein. Whenever you see an ending ASE like this, you can kind of know that we're talking about some sort of an enzyme, which is a type of protein. So ATP synthase is a specific protein that generates ATP from ADP. So its basic function is to add that extra phosphate group to it to make ATP. We have chlorophyll, which you've probably heard of before. It is a green pigment that captures energy from the sun. It is found in plants and algae and other types of like little protists like euglena and stuff like that. And the chloroplast is the organelle that we find in plant cells where chlorophyll is located, where photosynthesis takes place. And we'll talk more about some of these as well. The electron transport chain, the light-dependent reactions, the light-independent reactions. We have other energy-carrying molecules here as well. NADP plus and NADPH. Photosynthesis, we have different photosystems. We're going to kind of go into some of the details on that stuff coming up here in the next couple of slides. So again, hopefully we'll simplify it. Even with my simplified explanation, it kind of gets a little bit tricky, but the one that's given in the lesson is just a lot of it tricky. So I just want to make sure that you guys are not overwhelmed. So you've probably all heard of photosynthesis before. I think you guys learn about that when you're very young, how plants are our producers. They take the sun's energy and they can make their own food. And that's what a producer is. We also call producers autotrophs because they can make their own food. Photosynthesis literally translates into making something from light. Synthesis meaning making something and photo referring to light. So they're synthesizing their own food and light is used as the energy to be able to make this synthesis happen. A simplified version of photosynthesis is in this picture here. We have a sunflower. You can see light coming in. The sunflower also takes in carbon dioxide through its leaves, has these little pores in the leaves called stomates, and they open up and carbon dioxide comes in, takes water through its roots, and it uses those ingredients to be able to synthesize sugar. And sugar is the food that the plant can then be able to use. It actually can then combine those sugars to make some complex starches and stuff like that. Oxygen is a byproduct of photosynthesis. It is just a waste product. The plant is not using that in the photosynthesis process. By the way, the plant does need some oxygen to be able to do cellular respiration, which is something we'll talk about later, but it produces more oxygen than it needs, and so it gives off that excess oxygen as a waste product, and we thank them for it very much. So we see that simplified explanation of it, and then they gives us the chemical formula here, that photosynthesis is carbon dioxide, water, and light. And this arrow means yields. So it yields sugar, which is C6H12O6, and oxygen. And this is a balanced chemical equation. And if you were in physical science with me last year, you remember how to balance your chemical equations. So we need 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters to be able to generate 1 molecule of sugar, and then we have off 6 oxygens as waste products. Again, should be familiar from physical science. We have our reactants on the left and our products on the right. Okay, so far that stuff should be fairly easy. Okay, so we haven't gotten to the hard stuff yet. So the first thing, and by the way, before I forget, don't forget to open up the outline that I have generated for you, which is on my website, just to have that as kind of a guide to follow along with. The first thing we're going to look at is, after we did the definition of photosynthesis and the overview, which is on the outline, we're going to look at the anatomy of a chloroplast, because photosynthesis is done inside a plant cell in structures called chloroplasts, and these are unique to plant cells, right? Animal cells do not have these. If we zoom in on the chloroplast, we get this picture right here. And I'm just going to zoom in right here as well. So we have these pictures side by side. So a chloroplast is a membrane-bound organelle. Remember, we talked about those as well. So it's got a membrane, an outer and an inner membrane to kind of maintain the stuff in the chloroplast and to regulate what can go in and out of the chloroplast. Inside the chloroplast, we have these little structures called thylakoids, and they kind of look like little, I think they look a little bit like little batteries, like those little lithium ion batteries that you use in like watches and toys and electronics and stuff like that, all stacked together. Or you can think of them as a stack of pancakes, which is what I oftentimes say they are like. And those, the thylakoids, also have their own membrane called the thylakoid membrane, which surrounds a thylakoid, and inside of it is the structure called the lumen. Outside of, there's a whole stack of thylakoids, by the way, is known as a granum. And there are multiple grana throughout the entire chloroplast. There's this liquid that surrounds everything, and that's called the stroma. So the liquid all around here, kind of all around here, is the stroma. So we have the thylakoids, which themselves are membrane bound, and we have the stroma. Those are basically our 2 parts of what's going on inside the chloroplast. So that's our anatomy of the chloroplast. Whoops. And then we're going to look at 2 processes that happen. So we have what's known as the light reactions, or we can say light-dependent reactions, and we have what are known as the light-independent reactions. The light reactions need light to happen. The light-independent reactions don't. So they can either happen in the dark or they can happen in the light. It doesn't really matter. They're independent of light. It doesn't matter. But light is required for the light reactions, which is why you think of plants requiring light to do photosynthesis. For part of that process, they do need light. So light is kind of the catalyst of the reaction here. What it does is water, as we can see, an arrow generating here showing water coming into those thylakoids and light, and then oxygen leaving. This water molecule is split. We can see that here. Again, light coming in, water is being split. So water is split in the chloroplast by the light into hydrogen and oxygen, right? So that's important. It's a huge important step here. The first kind of important step is that light splits the water molecule. A photon of light, as a particle of light, actually splits the water molecule. So let's write that down here. Kind of large. I don't know if I need to zoom out here to make that smaller. Maybe I'll just make this guy bigger. Here we go. Okay. Into water and oxygen. Again, that's important. Just kind of zoom out a little bit here because I want to have a little bit more space. Actually, that's fine. We'll keep this guy right there because that's actually where this should belong anyways. All right, so when that happens, the oxygen exits the cell at that point. Oxygen isn't necessary anymore for photosynthesis. So that's kind of where the waste from oxygen comes from. Hydrogen, however, is shuffled inside the thylakoid membrane. So this hydrogen, see, all these hydrogens accumulate inside the thylakoid membrane. So I'm going to put that here. So it says it looks like an H and a plus because hydrogen ions, these are hydrogen ions, are literally just protons. And so this is just a proton, but it's hydrogen ions are just, remember that an atom is protons, neutrons, and electrons. Hydrogens have, it's just a single proton, no electron because it's been ionized and it has no neutrons. So all it is a proton, but we abbreviate it H plus, knowing that it's hydrogen. So hydrogen ions move inside the thylakoid membrane. So that's inside one of the pancakes. So now we're just kind of zooming in on an individual little pancake here. And inside all these hydrogen ions are accumulating. Now what this is it's generating a hydrogen ion gradient. Remember that a gradient means that you have more of something here and then less of something on the other side of a membrane, a semi-permeable membrane. So essentially, you're generating a positive charge on one side, more positive than the other side. Okay, so there's some potential energy that's happening here. So this is generating a H plus, so hydrogen ion, which means that there is potential energy. Remember that diffusion, which is what's going to happen here, it's kind of facilitated diffusion, but it's still diffusion, means that ions are going to move from an area of high concentration to low concentration, right? So you get all these H plus ions in here, and they want to move out to equalize the concentration. So if we put this here, in fact, you know what I'm going to get rid of for now is I'm going to just maximize this guy so I have more space, because I actually do have this picture, and I'll just make it bigger so we can see it a bit more. Okay, that way we have a bit more space. So I'm going to type this out, but whatever. H plus ions want to move from high concentration to low concentration. Okay. They have to do this. Only way out is through this little doorway here, and that is called ATP synthase. So they have to move out through called a protein doorway, but it's like it's maybe a good way of thinking of it. I'll just put it in quotation marks because it's really not called a protein doorway, but so this puts them, so they're at a higher energy state right here, and this is a lower energy state. So they're basically have a lot of potential energy. They lose that potential energy and they give it to ADP to make ATP. So that energy then is used to attach another phosphate to the molecule ADP to generate ATP. Because remember that ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, the energy is then stored in the chemical bond that connects that extra phosphate to that molecule, okay? Energy is used to attach another phosphate to ADP, making ATP. Energy is stored in the, I'll have to scroll up a little bit here. Okay, so that's part of the light reactions to generate ATP. That's what's going on here. The other part is that there's also electrons that are given up by the water molecule and are passed along through a series of different proteins here. So these three proteins, PS2, B6F, and PS1, photosystem 2. Okay, they're just passed along here. And this is known as an electron transport chain because they are transporting those electrons. And those electrons are used to generate another energy-carrying molecule, NADPH, from NADP+. It's essentially the same process that's being used to generate ATP. You have these electrons are energy. Remember that moving electrons is current, and current is electricity, and electricity is energy, right? So you have a moving electron here is essentially a current that's generated being transferred from across from one protein to another and transported out, and that little bit of energy is used to create NADP plus or NADPH. Actually use one of the hydrogen ions as well to be able to do that. Okay, so let's do that part. Let's just get this out of the way here. So also electron from the water is transported along a series of proteins and used to make NADPH. Okay, that's it. You don't have to know. I don't want you to have to know every little step here along the electron transport chain. I think that's unnecessary. So bottom line is, in the light reactions, water molecule gets split, oxygen gets released, ATP and NADPH are generated, and that is like the end of the light reactions. Okay, so I'm going to put that at the bottom here. So, bottom line is that light reactions, I can't type. Water is split, O2 is released, and ATP and NADPH are made. Both are energy carriers. I'll look at the end. I'll make that a different color here. The end of our light reactions. Okay, light reactions. So then we have our light independent reactions. And I'm going to go back here to something else right here, which is also known as the Kelvin cycle. I don't know, in biology they like to have different names for things sometimes just to make it more confusing, I think. So this one right here is our picture of the Kelvin cycle. Beautiful. It's also very complicated, but rest assured that you don't have to know it all. Basically, and I think this didn't actually transfer over very well for some reason. Here, I'll just do this. In our Kelvin cycle picture, what you're going to notice is that you start off with ATP and NADPH, and you end up with sugar. So the energy that is kind of stored in the ATP and the NADPH, combined with carbon dioxide that is brought into the plant through those stomata that we talked about earlier, is then used to assemble a series of different carbon molecules that eventually ends up being sugar. And at the end of the Kelvin cycle, sugar is made, and this Na or ADP and NADP plus go back to the light-dependent reactions to then say, okay, we're ready for more energy. Let's become ATP and NADPH again. So they kind of go back to that. So let's put kind of our info here. So the NADPH and ATP, they go out of the thylakoid at this point, by the way, just from our anatomy perspective. They are moving out of the thylakoid here, okay? And they're going just into that liquidy part called the stroma, which is all surrounding the thylakoids, okay? So that's where they are. Wow, so giant. Okay. The plant, or the leaf, I'll say, takes in CO2 and the energy from the bonds of Na, and ATP are used to make sugar, which is C6H12O6. So you can see here, CO2 has the carbon and the oxygen, right? And that's pretty much all sugar is carbon and oxygen. So it's just a reassembly and kind of breaking apart some carbons. You use 6 carbons to be able to reassemble everything and make one sugar. Okay? To make sugar, and then NADPH is reduced to NADP plus, and ATP is reduced to ADP. They go back to the light reactions to regenerate again. Okay. So once they're all done and they've given off their energy, then we start back over here again. Yes. Sorry. My things keeps moving. We start back over here and we use them. They come back and they're like, okay, give us more. And then, more water gets broken, more hydrogens move through ATP synthase. ATP is then regenerated from ADP that just came back from the Kelvin cycle. And NADPH is generated from NADP plus that also just came back from the Kelvin cycle. So that is it. Those are our light reactions and our light independent reactions. And that is pretty much the bottom of line of what you should know. Just kind of a general understanding of, what's done in the light reactions, what's done in the light independent reactions, the difference, kind of like a little bit about the electron transport chain and ATP synthase and those two energy carriers. And then in the Kelvin cycle, or the light independent reactions, because that's the same thing, that CO2 is actually changed into sugars using that energy from the ATP and the NADPH. That's it. Hopefully that helped a little bit understanding this portion of the unit. If you have any questions, you guys let me know. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next one.